Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Anthony Darst, aka Anthony D, coming to you with a video today. It's going to be about Making a Murderer, the new Netflix series that premiered in December of 2015. It's about the Stephen Avery case. 10 one-hour episodes, jam-packed with a bunch of court hearings and findings and witness testimonies and bunk confessions and bogus police. But there's all kinds of stuff that this case reveals about Manitowok County Department. There's all kinds of fishy shit in here. So I was going to go over some of it, give you a couple of my points of views, let you know what I think, but I'm going to try to stick to the facts. Now, guys, I know I'm not going to be able to cover all the aspects of this case. I know I'm not going to be able to point you in any direction by any means, but I will be able to give you some of the facts that I know. Forgive me if I'm, a little bit overwhelmed with details. So I'm actually going to do you guys a favor and leave a bunch of the names out, leave a bunch of the stuff, and I'm going to stick to the basics. Guys, this is your spoiler alert. Let's get into it. All right, guys, so a little background on Stephen Avery's. Stephen Avery's back before 1985. Pissed off one of the Manitowok County Sheriff's Department's officers because he drove some woman off the road and pointed a gun at her. Apparently it was unloaded, but she was related to one of the Sheriff's Department's officers or something along those lines. Anyways, 1985 comes around. Stephen Avery's gets caught up into a situation where the Manitowok Sheriff's Department is coming after him, hit him with sexual assault. He was convicted for sexual assault and put in prison. He served 18 years before science came back and reviewed the DNA, and they found that the DNA involved in the sexual assault case, in fact, some other guy's DNA. He was exonerated and let loose in 2003. So 2003, Stephen Avery's gets out, files a $36 million lawsuit against the Manitowok County Sheriff's Department. He starts a federal lawsuit for $36 million against the Manitowok County Police Department. And he's on his way to making boatloads of money for the 18 years that he spent innocently in prison. Eventually, one day he's got a woman coming to his property to take pictures of a van that they are using because they own this Avery salvage yard in Manitowok County. 25-year-old photographer Teresa Halbachs is going to be taking pictures of a van at the Avery Auto Salvage. Apparently, she runs into Steve Avery's, whatever, takes the pictures and leaves, and that's a wrap. That's it. Stephen Avery said, I saw her leave. It wasn't a big deal. 2005, Stephen Avery was convicted for the murder of Teresa Halbachs, which took place on October 31st, 2005. She was a photographer for a local auto trader magazine. Now, in this investigation, the Manitowok County Police Department, Sheriff's Department, whatever, they were not supposed to be involved in this at all because of the prior conviction in 1985, because they had to do with the investigation that took place back then, and he was proven innocent, he was exonerated, so they're no longer supposed to be doing any kind of investigation or be involved in this whatsoever. So that's a little bit about the background. Now, here's some of the key points. This is where it gets a little weird. So they find a key in Stephen Avery's trailer next to a nightstand out in the open. Here's a RAV4 key. Yep, it's probably hers. What do you know? It just popped up. Interesting part about that is that it was on the 7th search of the trailer. So it's like you're gonna go in there 7 times, and then you're all of a sudden gonna, check it out. Here's a key. I wonder if it's hers. Now, mind you, they're not supposed to be on the scene anyways. They're not supposed to be investigating. And this officer was specifically involved in the 1985 conviction of Stephen Avery. So he's definitely not supposed to be involved. Now, they find this key. The interesting part about that is that the key, it did not have Teresa Halbachs' DNA on it whatsoever, but it did have Stephen Avery's. So you're meaning to tell me that it was her key that she had for years prior to being killed, and it didn't have her DNA on it? When Teresa Halbachs gets murdered, she gets called in missing on November 3rd. November 5th, they find her vehicle, but on November 3rd, the officer that was involved in the prior case, 1985, he actually called in the plates on Teresa Halbachs' vehicle. Okay, so it's interesting that this vehicle's missing, but why would he be calling to check the plates of a vehicle that's missing? And the lady on the phone says, yep, that's registered to a missing vehicle. Now, the vehicle was found in his salvage yard that was owned by the Avery family. It was found near the entrance. So the search team that went out on November 3rd searching for Teresa Halbachs found her car shortly after being instructed to go check out Stephen Avery's plot. So it was found near the entrance. It was covered by some boards, some branches. It looked very suspicious. They found, or they had called it in. And of course, you know, the plates were missing. The cop already verified that 2 days prior. But it looked super suspicious. So they get into the car, they verify the VIN. And of course, when they're doing it, they find some blood stains underneath the ignition. They find some stuff on the passenger side seat. And some other interesting stuff. But the way that this blood was placed, it was very suspicious for one, if you ask me, just because of the shape of it. Kind of looked like maybe if you use a Q-tip or something along the lines. Either way, it looked fishy as hell. So later on in the case, they find out that the evidence box of Stephen Avery's from the 1985 case, priorly convicted, got exonerated, got out, the evidence had been tampered with. So the evidence seal was cut on the box. You go into the box, there's a styrofoam box, also was cut, and all that's in it is a vial of blood with a purple cap, and it's got a extraction point hole where somebody extracted some blood from there, and nobody can explain it because nobody signed out the evidence, nobody went into the office, nobody. Another thing that I thought was interesting was the Manitowok County Sheriff's Department, that was not supposed to be involved in the case at all, didn't even look into other suspects like her ex-boyfriend, her roommate, her brother. They didn't look into any of that. They didn't look into any of the recent phone calls. They didn't look into anything. They saw Stephen Avery's and they were like, oh, it was this guy. But that was before, they already were pinning it on Stephen Avery's before they even had all of the evidence to back it up. Now, just to throw things into a crazier loop, Brendan Dassey, that's Stephen Avery's nephew, he gets involved. He reads a book, Kiss the Girls, and he comes up with this entire scene that happened in his head anyways, and he goes into detail about what might have happened, how she might have been murdered, how they might have done it, and says he was involved from the very beginning. And when they go in and they ask him, they start showing these interviews. This guy is not very smart. He's not all there. And what's interesting is that his IQ is 68 and Forrest Gump's was 75. I appreciate that, Jeremy Johns. But just to give you a comparison, so they're drilling this kid. They're like, we want to help you, and the only way we can help you is if you tell us exactly what we want to hear. So they're like, what happened to her head? What did you do to her head? He's like, I cut her hair. They're like, no, what happened to her head? He's like, I punched it. And then one of the officers gets completely pissed off, and after hours of interrogating him, he just throws it out there like, yo, who shot her in the head? He's like, he did it. It's like, man, so then all of a sudden now they got a confession that they're going to be using against Stephen Avery's. But to top that off, later at the end of the show, he gets locked up for life too. So he doesn't even get the option of parole till 2048. Crazy. Now, another thing, just to give you an idea of Brendan Dassey, is on a phone call with his mother, he's like, well, they said it was inconsistent. He didn't know what the word inconsistent means. And he's like, Mom, do you know what that means? She's like, I don't really know. So if that's beyond your vocabulary, it's kind of scary that they're going to take everything that you say into account and completely hold it against them. So the fact that it's stuck on Brendan Dassey after the whole ordeal is really sad to me, because he even said, I learned it from a book. Kiss the Girls, I think, is what it's called. And it's apparently a book that portrays the same scenario that happened that he described. Now, when they started looking into the confession, as far as Brendan Dassey's confession goes, there wasn't any evidence that proved that any of his statement was real. He said that it happened in the bedroom, then he changed his statement, said it happened in the garage. It didn't happen in either. They couldn't find any blood spatter. Now, there is some controversy that I'll get into in a minute that goes into some details that weren't part of the documentary that states otherwise, that it's possible that he might have been involved. But We'll get into that in a second. Later on, Brendan Dassey changes his statement. He says, no, I was just sitting there playing video games. I knew exactly what time I got home. I knew exactly what time I got here. I knew that didn't happen. It couldn't have happened. So now, the documentary is just in your head and you're thinking like, whoa, wow, man, this kid really has no idea what's going on. And in the meantime, Stephen Avery's just sitting here just getting accused and plummeted by his own family now, on top of the false allegation. It's on top of the bogus or fishy as hell evidence that's being used against him. This dude is just getting ripped apart. Now, Brendan Dassey, he didn't really have a chance from the beginning because they gave him a shitty public defender that didn't do much good anyway. But because of that, he might even get a second chance. He may get a second trial based on the fact that his constitutional rights were violated due to ineffective assistance of counsel and an involuntary confession. So guys, that's just a quick rundown of some of the things that Stephen Avery's had used against him. It gets so fishy. The fishiest part to me is that the cop is calling in like, hey, I need to run this plate number. Now, I'm thinking personally, and don't tell anybody I said this, but I'm thinking personally, maybe that cop is like, hey, is this the chick that we're supposed to use to frame Stephen Avery? Is this the one we're supposed to use against him? Because I could do it right now. Not saying he did anything, but just to keep your wheels spinning. Now, some of the things that weren't covered by the documentary that I also find interesting, and you guys can dig into this, you can go as deep as you want. Like I said, I'm only touching on a few things here, but a hood latch under the RAV4 hood apparently had Stephen Avery's DNA on it. Now, what's interesting about that is somebody automatically changed it to sweat, which they can't verify if it was sweat. They just say it was DNA. The rebuttal to that is that could have easily been one of these officers with gloves on that had already handled some of Stephen Avery's stuff or put him in the vehicle and then touched the RAV4 or whatever. There's a million ways it could have gone, but from touching one of his things to swiping their thumb on the RAV4 latch, that's a possible way that it could have happened. Now, another thing that's interesting that they don't talk about is that they had proven that the bones that they had found, the fragments and whatever that they had found in the fire pit, she couldn't have been burned on that property because the fire couldn't have gotten hot enough to burn the body the way that it had been burned. So that was super interesting to me. Now, they found her Palm Pilot and the camera in the burn barrel. That was also not in the documentary. I thought that was interesting. They had said something about the bullet and that they had proven that it had Stephen Avery's DNA on it, but there was bullets all over the property because they shot on the property, so there was just rounds everywhere anyway. Teresa Halbachs received 3 calls from Stephen Avery the same day that she was murdered, so on Halloween, but he used star 67 to hide his name, and he apparently signed up the appointment using a different name rather than Stephen Avery. So that's another interesting thing that wasn't involved. It doesn't necessarily prove he's guilty, and I'm not by any means saying I think he's innocent, but I'm not saying I think he's guilty. Now, there's another thing that they talk about is his animal abuse before the 1985. It was actually in 1983. The documentary states that he had tossed the cat over the fire and it caught up, but apparently what had happened is he covered this cat in oil and he lit the cat on fire. One more thing is that the picture taken of Teresa Halbachs in front of her RAV4 has her holding her keys, which are connected to a keychain, but they only found the single key in Stephen Avery's trailer after the 7th search. Personally, what I think is going on here is that yes, they may have been trying to frame or pin some stuff on him, but I'm not going to say that he's guilty, but either way, I would say that I think there was definitely some foul play on Manitowok County's part. They definitely did a lot of things they weren't supposed to. They did a lot of things that kind of discredited their department to the point where I personally think that there was 10,000 reasons why this should have been a mistrial. Later on, if you dig into it, apparently now there was some jury tampering, that they were getting very strong threats and that they needed to go one certain way versus another. And there's all kinds of stuff that you can find on this. But to me, it was interesting because I watched the first episode and then I just got sucked in. I couldn't stop, and then I had to research it, and then I had to make a video for you guys and lay it out real quick. So, guys, I know that's a lot of information. I think it's an interesting topic, and I think it's crazy. Now, one thing I personally, I mean, if I was on the jury, I mean, if they're going to hit him with a murder charge, I don't know, a lifetime is 30 years. I know they say that. Either way, I think they should have accounted the fact that he's already served 18 years that were of his innocence. They stripped him of that innocence. Now, I personally don't think that some dude that's waiting on a $36 million lawsuit is going to murder somebody. I definitely don't think that's true. And unfortunately for him, he had family working against him. Unintentionally, it sounds like. But either way, I mean, this dude's gotten 18 strikes against him, and he's still hoping on he's seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel. But I'll tell you what, this has raised so much hell, and there's so many people infuriated by it. In fact, President Obama says he can't even touch it because it's not a federal case, it's at a state level. But even the fact that President Obama is involved, I think it's definitely going to serve some justice at some point. I think there's some police officers out there that were doing some bogus stuff. I think there's some lawyers out there that are feeling pretty shady about some of the shit that they said. It's like, man, I can't imagine how many things had to go wrong for this dude to be sitting in the position that he's in. And the fact that you guys locked up some, mentally challenged 16-year-old that associated his uncle's unfortunate situation with some book that he read, I think it's pretty shitty all around. But guys, go ahead and post your theories, thoughts, comments below. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to reading them. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.